We may be looking at this conflict the wrong way. Most headlines frame the situation as a direct confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States. But some analysts argue that focusing only on the battlefield misses a deeper strategic reality. While generals stand at briefings highlighting high interception rates and tactical successes, economists and defense planners are examining a different set of numbers. Numbers that raise uncomfortable questions about the long-term sustainability of the war effort. At the same time, another global power, China, continues expanding its naval fleet and industrial base without firing a single shot in the current conflict. A simple example illustrates the imbalance. In March 2026, an Iranian Shahed 136, a relatively small drone, roughly the size of a motorcycle, can cost around $30,000 to manufacture using widely available components. When such a drone is detected approaching a military target, it may be intercepted by a MIM-Patund Patriot PAC-3, a highly advanced defensive missile that can cost about $3.7 million per launch. In purely financial terms, that means the defender may spend well over 100 times the cost of the attacking weapon just to stop a single drone. Individually, these interceptions are tactically successful. But when the same cost ratio repeats hundreds or thousands of times across a prolonged conflict, it creates a larger strategic question. How sustainable is a defense system built around extremely expensive interceptors against very cheap threats? This imbalance has become a central theme in modern military economics. Over the past decade, cheaper technologies, particularly drones, loitering munitions, and cyber tools, have given smaller states and non-state actors ways to challenge far more expensive conventional militaries. The concern among some strategists is that advanced forces risk exhausting their resources responding to low-cost threats, gradually draining industrial capacity and defense budgets in the process. Strategic analysts have also warned that long conflicts can quietly shift global balances of power, even if the fighting appears contained. For example, Kevin Shen of the US Rajaratnam School of International Studies has argued that prolonged military commitments can limit how quickly the United States prepares for potential competition elsewhere, particularly with China. His argument reflects a broader debate within defense circles whether extended regional conflicts distract from long-term strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. To understand what's at stake, consider the scale of some key military assets in the region. In southern Israel's Negev Desert sits Nevatim Air Base, one of the most strategically important air bases in the Middle East. The base hosts squadrons of the F-35 IAD, among the most advanced combat aircraft ever developed. Israel currently operates dozens of these stealth jets, with plans to expand the fleet significantly in the coming years. These aircraft represent billions of dollars in military capability, designed for high-tech warfare against sophisticated air defenses. The contrast between extremely advanced systems like stealth fighters and the inexpensive drones used in modern conflicts highlights a growing transformation in warfare. Increasingly, military planners must balance cutting-edge technology with cost-effective defenses against swarms of cheaper weapons. That economic dimension, how much it costs to attack versus how much it costs to defend, may ultimately shape the long-term strategic consequences of conflicts like the one unfolding today. Each one costs approximately 96,039 aircraft, 3.7 billion sitting on a runway. And that figure doesn't include the hardened shelters, the intelligence targeting centers, the maintenance depots, the newly constructed hangars for KC-46 aerial refueling tankers. Add the infrastructure, and you're looking at a multi-billion-dollar concentration of offensive military power in a single geographic location, a location that Iran's military planners have marked at the very top of their target list. This is not a coincidence. This is the logic of asymmetric warfare. Iran doesn't need to destroy all of Nevatim. It doesn't even need to destroy half of it. It only needs to demonstrate that the shield can be overwhelmed, that somewhere in the barrage of 50, 100, 200 incoming missiles, a few will get through. Because once the F-35I fleet is grounded, even temporarily, Israel loses its primary tool for penetrating Iranian airspace, the offensive edge disappears, and the entire strategic architecture of Western deterrence in the region collapses with it. So how does Israel defend NITM with the best air defense money can buy? Modern missile defense systems are extraordinarily advanced, but they are also extraordinarily expensive. Take the A3 developed jointly by Boeing and Israel Aerospace Industries. Each interceptor is estimated to cost between $2 million and $4 million. Then there is the MIM-14 Patriot PAC-3, which costs roughly $3.7 million per missile. At the very top of the missile defense hierarchy sits the THAAD, where a single interceptor can cost about 12 by 7 million, and deploying a full battery of the system can approach $1 billion. The economics of missile defense become especially striking when large numbers of interceptors are used over a short period. During the first 10 days of intense exchanges in early 2026, US and Israeli forces reportedly launched around 133 advanced interceptors in order to maintain interception rates close to 90%, according to analysis from the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, often abbreviated as GINSA. The cost of those defensive launches alone reached roughly $1.28 billion, and that figure covers only the interceptors themselves, not the broader operational costs of maintaining the defensive network. Now, compare that to the estimated cost of the weapons being intercepted. Much of Iran's arsenal in that engagement relied on systems such as the Zulfiqar missile, which analysts estimate may cost around $150,000 per unit. Other platforms included the EMA missile, with estimated costs around $250,000, as well as heavier systems like the Horamshah missile, which can reach several million per missile. Even with those higher-end systems included, the overall cost ratio often still favors the attacker. Some estimates suggest that for every dollar spent launching an offensive missile, defenders may spend dozens of dollars more to intercept it. But the financial imbalance is only part of the concern. A deeper issue involves production capacity. The United States produces relatively limited numbers of certain interceptors each year. For example, annual production of THAAD interceptors has been estimated in the range of a dozen to fewer than 20 units per year. During the opening phase of the conflict, US forces reportedly used dozens of THAAD interceptors, potentially representing several years' worth of production output consumed in a matter of days. Replenishing those stockpiles is not a simple process. Advanced interceptors require highly specialized manufacturing, precision guidance systems, sophisticated sensors, advanced propulsion technologies, and materials that can withstand extreme temperatures during high-speed flight. These components are produced through complex supply chains and highly specialized factories, meaning production cannot simply be scaled up
overnight, even when additional funding is approved.
Expanding manufacturing capacity can take years. This production constraint is one reason why military planners increasingly debate the economics of modern air and missile defense. As offensive weapons such as drones and short-range missiles become cheaper and easier to produce, defending against them with extremely sophisticated interceptors raises difficult questions about sustainability. Maintaining effective defenses remains essential, but doing so while balancing cost, production capacity, and long-term readiness has become one of the most challenging strategic calculations facing modern militaries. Building inventory takes years, not months. So when the generals report 99% of targets intercepted, they are technically correct. What they are not telling you is the following. The magazine is getting empty. The next Iranian salvo costs Thran roughly the same as the last one. The next American response cost a production capacity that doesn't exist yet. The attacker can reload faster than the defender can manufacture. This is not a temporary tactical problem. This is a structural flaw in the entire architecture of Western deterrence, and it was visible years before the first missile of this conflict was fired. Every analyst who has studied the economics of saturation warfare saw it coming. The question was never whether the trap would close. The question was only when, and the trap has closed. But the loss of billions of dollars in missiles is almost routine by the standards of American military spending. What was happening simultaneously in the mountains of western Iran at that exact moment? That is the part of this story that almost no one is discussing, and it changes everything. Here's a fact about Iran that Thran works very hard to prevent its own citizens from contemplating. Approximately 9 to 10 million Kurds live within Iran's borders. That's roughly 10% of the entire population concentrated along the western frontier in the provinces of Kurdistan, Kermanshah, West Azerbaijan, and Ilam. For decades, the government of Iran has managed its Kurdish regions through a mixture of cultural restrictions, economic marginalization, and periodic military crackdowns. Policies intended to maintain control often had the opposite long-term effect. Instead of building loyalty, they created a deep reservoir of resentment among segments of the Kurdish population. That tension becomes strategically significant when you look at the geography surrounding those communities. Stretching across western Iran is the Zagros Mountains, about 1,600 kilometers of rugged ridges, steep valleys, narrow passes, and peaks rising above 3,000 m. It is terrain famous for slowing or defeating conventional armies. Even during the Iran-Iraq War, forces under Saddam Hussein struggled when mechanized units pushed into these mountains. Tanks, heavy artillery, and large formations often lose their advantages there, while smaller units familiar with the terrain can move, hide, and strike far more effectively. That is why Kurdish armed groups operating in this region attract so much attention from analysts. One such organization, the Kurdistan Free Life Party, is believed by many observers to have several thousand experienced fighters. Many of them gained combat experience during campaigns against Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, where they learned small unit tactics, ambush strategies, and crossbar mobility in mountainous environments. Another faction, the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran, maintains its own armed wing and has decades of organizational history with networks that reportedly reach back to Kurdish political movements of the Maident century. A third group, the Kurdistan Freedom Party, is smaller but still active. One detail that often draws attention from defense analysts is that some fighters from these groups participated in international anti-ISIS operations. During campaigns around places like Kirkuk in 2015, certain Kurdish units received training or coordination support from Western military forces involved in the coalition campaign. That experience exposed some fighters to modern military tactics and organizational methods that could influence how they operate today. When analysts combine those factors, mountain terrain, local knowledge, crossbow networks, and fighters with real battlefield experience, they conclude that the region could support a form of warfare very different from conventional battles between regular armies. In mountainous environments like the Zagros, smaller groups familiar with the landscape can sometimes offset the technological advantages of larger state forces. That is why security planners often pay close attention to Kurdish regions along Iran's western frontier. Geography and long-standing political tensions together create conditions that could shape how conflicts unfold there. On February 22, 2026, these historically fragmented factions achieved something unprecedented. 5 major armed Kurdish parties formally established the Coalition of Political Forces of Iranian Kurdistan, the CPFAK. Their stated objective is unambiguous: the total overthrow of the Islamic Republic and the establishment of civil governance in whatever power vacuum follows. Now, I want to be very precise here because this is where the story becomes genuinely complicated. Intelligence reports indicate that the CIA is actively working to arm Kurdish forces inside Iran. US President Trump reportedly made a direct phone call to Mustafa Hedri, the leader of the PDKI, signaling a level of strategic coordination that goes well beyond unofficial contact. And in early March 2026, US and Israeli air assets specifically targeted Iranian Law Enforcement Command headquarters in Kurdish cities, Sanandaj, Maravan, facilities that serve as the regime's primary instrument of internal control. Destroy the security apparatus, and the path for Kurdish fighters moving east from the Zagros becomes considerably less obstructed from a pure tactical standpoint. This is elegant. The IRGC is being forced to divert resources, manpower, and air defense systems away from the Persian Gulf and the Israeli border to secure an interior front that stretches across 600 kilometers of mountain terrain. Every battalion deployed to Kermanshah is a battalion not defending a missile battery near Thrawan. Every radar system repositioned to cover the Zagros is a gap in the coverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is being forced to fight on 2 fronts simultaneously, and the second front costs its architects almost nothing. But here is where a decade of watching these dynamics forces me to say something uncomfortable. The Kurdish front is also a trap. Backing a Kurdish insurgency might seem like a clever tactical move on paper, but it creates a completely different kind of trap, one that can be far harder to escape. If the United States were to openly arm and sustain Kurdish militant groups inside Iran, it would cross a major strategic threshold. Supporting an insurgency inside a country of roughly 90 million people directly challenges its territorial integrity. And once that line is crossed, there is rarely a clean way to step back. Any Iranian government that eventually replaces the current leadership would face enormous domestic pressure. Accepting a negotiated settlement with Washington could easily be portrayed internally as surrendering to foreign-backed separatism, making diplomacy politically impossible. This is one of the concerns raised by scholars who study great power intervention. John Mearsheimer has long argued that successful regime change strategies require the new government to align closely with the intervening power. But in a large, diverse country like Iran, especially if the state were weakened or fragmented, expecting a stable pro-American government to emerge may be unrealistic. Instead of producing a clean political transition, the more likely outcome could be prolonged instability and deeper entanglement for outside powers. Insurgencies also develop their own momentum once they begin. Supporting them requires ongoing funding, weapons deliveries, intelligence sharing, and political coordination with neighboring states. In this case, those neighbors would include Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, all countries that have significant Kurdish
Populations of their own and their own complicated relationships with Kurdish political movements. Managing those overlapping interests could become a diplomatic challenge of its own. Over time, the situation could begin to resemble the kind of long-term nation-building commitments that defined the war in Afghanistan, where tactical decisions made early in a conflict created obligations that lasted for decades.
In that sense, analysts sometimes say the tactics may appear effective in the short term, but the long-term strategy raises much harder questions. And while much of the public discussion focuses on immediate military developments from clashes in the Middle East to air defense battles over places like Nevatim Air Base, another strategic shift is unfolding far from the battlefield across the Pacific. China has been expanding its industrial and naval capacity at an extraordinary pace. One statistic frequently cited in defense discussions is the scale of the shipbuilding gap between China and the United States. Estimates suggest China's shipbuilding capacity may exceed that of the US by well over 200 times when measured in industrial output. Facilities such as the Jiangnan shipyard illustrate the scale of this expansion. Massive industrial complexes capable of producing commercial and military vessels simultaneously. Much of that production flows through the state-owned giant China State Shipbuilding Corporation, which has become one of the largest shipbuilding enterprises in the world. In some recent years, its output of commercial shipping tonnage alone has rivaled or exceeded the entire production capacity of several Western shipbuilding industries combined. For strategic planners, the concern is not just about the number of ships being built, but about the broader industrial balance between major powers. Wars are not determined only by weapons on the battlefield. They are also shaped by factories, supply chains, and long-term production capacity. While conflicts in one region absorb attention and resources, industrial expansion elsewhere can quietly reshape the global balance of power without a single missile being fired. China captured 53% of the global commercial shipbuilding market in 2024. The United States shares 0.1%, not a typo, not a rounding error. 0.1%, and China's military-civil fusion strategy means that every ship produced for commercial clients in those same yards, every tanker, every container vessel, every bulk carrier is building the organizational capacity, the supply chains, the engineering expertise, and the worker training pipelines that feed directly into planned naval expansion. The commercial market is financing the military buildup. The world is paying Beijing to build the fleet that will challenge American naval dominance. While the United States was burning through $12 million TH-8 interceptors over the Persian Gulf, China was mass-producing the Type 052D destroyer, a highly capable warship, displacing 7,500 tons at a rate of 3. Production capacity is becoming one of the most important strategic variables in modern military competition. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, long considered the backbone of the United States Navy, is currently produced at roughly 1 to 2 ships per year, depending on budget cycles and shipyard capacity. Meanwhile, China has been expanding the output of its own modern destroyer classes at a faster pace. Analysts often point out that Chinese naval shipyards have been launching large surface combatants at rates approaching twice that of comparable US production in certain years. One of the most prominent examples is the Type 055 destroyer operated by the People's Liberation Army, Navy. These large surface combatants displace around 12,000 tons and carry over 100 vertical launch system cells, allowing them to deploy a mix of anti-ship, anti-air, and land attack missiles. More than 10 of these ships have already entered service, and additional units are expected. Their design emphasizes long-range strike capability and cooperative engagement with other naval and air assets. By comparison, the Zumwalt-class destroyer, initially envisioned as a next-generation platform for the U.S. Navy, ended up with a production run of only 3 ships after major cost overruns and shifting mission requirements forced the program to scale back dramatically. While the Zumwalt ships incorporate advanced stealth design and cutting-edge technology, the small number produced means they cannot play the same fleet-wide role as the larger Arleigh Burke destroyer force. Yet, for many defense analysts, the ships themselves are only
part of the picture.
a major focus is on the development of long-range missile systems designed to challenge traditional naval power projection. One frequently discussed system is the DF-26 developed by the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force. With an estimated range of over 4,000 kilometers, the DF-26 can carry either conventional or nuclear payloads. It has sometimes been described as an anti-area missile because of its potential role in targeting large naval vessels at long distances. Open-source intelligence and satellite imagery in recent years have suggested that China may have deployed hundreds of these missiles supported by mobile launch platforms. The strategic purpose of such systems is often described as anti-access area denial, a doctrine designed to make it extremely risky for opposing naval forces to operate close to China's coastline during a conflict. By combining long-range missiles, surveillance
Systems and naval forces.
Beijing aims to raise the potential cost of any military operation near its territory. On the US side, long-range precision strike capabilities still play a central role in naval strategy. One of the most widely used systems is the Tomahawk cruise missile developed by Raytheon. The Tomahawk allows ships and submarines to strike targets from hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away while remaining outside many defensive systems. Production numbers fluctuate year to year, but they remain far lower than the total number used during major conflicts. For example, during the opening phase of the Iraq War, the United States launched hundreds of Tomahawk missiles within the first weeks of the campaign. These comparisons highlight a broader debate among military planners: how industrial capacity, manufacturing speed, and stockpile levels influence long-term strategic competition. Modern wars are not determined only by advanced technology. They also depend on the ability to produce ships, missiles, and equipment fast enough to sustain operations over time. As global powers invest heavily in expanding their defense industries, the balance between technological superiority and industrial scale is becoming a central question for future security planning. At 2025 production rates, replacing that single expenditure would take just over 10 years. Now, apply that to what's currently burning in the Middle East. During the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury, American naval forces fired an estimated 180 Standard missiles, SM-2, SM-3, and SM-6 variants, along with 90 Patriot rounds and 40 THD interceptors. Military analysts calculated that the Tomahawk expenditure in just the first 3 days of high-intensity operations represented roughly 10% of the Navy's entire Regio fire inventory. 3 days of combat in the Middle East consume 5 years of American cruise missile production, 5 years if China moves against Taiwan tomorrow, and I am not predicting it will. I am simply following the logic of the resource calculus. The US Navy would arrive to that theater with racks that have already been partially emptied in the Arabian Peninsula. A central concern in modern military planning is how resource allocation affects readiness in different regions. Much of the US strategy for operating in contested environments relies on long-range standoff strike capabilities, allowing forces to hit targets from a distance without exposing ships and crews to the most dangerous threat zones. Systems like the Tomahawk cruise missile are a key part of that approach. If large numbers of those weapons are used in one region, planners must think carefully about stockpiles and production capacity elsewhere. The financial side of maintaining a global military presence also adds another layer to the discussion. Operating a carrier strike group built around ships such as the USS Gerald R. Ford CVN-78 or the USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72 is extremely expensive. estimates often place the daily operational cost of a deployed carrier strike group in the tens of millions of dollars once fuel, maintenance personnel, logistics, and long-term wear on equipment are included. Sustaining multiple carriers in the same region for extended periods can therefore represent hundreds of millions of dollars each month. During periods of heightened tension in the Middle East, a large portion of the United States Navy's carrier activity has been concentrated there. Analysts sometimes measure this using steaming days, which track how much time ships spend deployed at sea. When a significant percentage of those days are focused on one theater, fewer naval resources remain available for operations in other regions, such as the Indo-Pacific. This dynamic is one reason why scholars of international relations often debate how great powers should prioritize threats. For example, John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago has argued that the rise of China represents the most significant long-term strategic challenge for the United States. From that perspective, the main geopolitical competition of the coming decades will center on the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. In that context, China's strategy does not necessarily require direct confrontation. Beijing has been steadily expanding its industrial capacity, military technology, and naval forces while avoiding large-scale conflict. Facilities such as the Jiangnan shipyard and companies like the China State Shipbuilding Corporation illustrate the scale of that industrial expansion. By focusing on shipbuilding, missile development, and manufacturing capacity, China can gradually strengthen its position without firing a shot. From this perspective, the key strategic competition is not only about battles or weapon systems, it is also about time, industrial capacity, and economic resources. Every missile launched, every deployment sustained, and every $1 billion spent in one theater represents resources that cannot be used somewhere else. That trade-off is at the heart of many current debates in defense policy. Observers who study the long history of U.S. overseas conflicts, from the war in Afghanistan to the Iraq War, often point out how expensive prolonged engagements can become. Trillions of dollars have been spent over the past 2 decades on wars intended to stabilize regions or deter adversaries. The ongoing debate among strategists is whether those investments improved long-term global stability or whether they diverted attention and resources away from emerging great power competition elsewhere in the world. Arsenals depleted, alliances strained, industrial bases that could not keep pace with the speed of consumption, and a rival power patient, methodical, capitalized, quietly filling the vacuum. What is happening right now is the same dynamic, but accelerated to a speed I've never seen before. The mathematics of modern saturation warfare have compressed the timeline dramatically. You no longer need a decade to exhaust a superpower. You need a few weeks of sustained exchanges at the right cost ratios. Defending a $30,000 drone with a 3-day Les 700,000 interceptor is not a victory. It is a transaction, and the ledger on that transaction run to its conclusion produces a military that has spent its precision strike inventory into depletion, whose factories cannot rebuild it in time, and whose naval forces are aging in the wrong ocean. The THAAD production shortfall won't close until April 2027. Tomahawk production, even under the new ramping agreements with Raytheon, cannot undo what has already been spent. The Patriot PAC-3 stockpile, the US currently holds approximately 25% of what its own military plans require for global contingencies, cannot be replenished by willpower or by press releases. Iran understands this. Iran has understood it for years. The strategy was never to win a conventional war with America. Some strategists describe modern conflict less as a contest of immediate battlefield victories and more as a long-term competition of resources and endurance. In that view, the objective is not necessarily to defeat an opponent outright in the opening stages of war, but to impose costs at a rate that gradually drains their stockpiles and strains their industrial base. The idea is simple. If a defender must spend far more money and resources to stop each incoming threat than the attacker spends to launch it, the defender's advantage can slowly erode over time. When analysts apply this framework to the broader strategic competition between the United States and China, they often focus on industrial capacity and long-term production trends. China's Navy, the People's Liberation Army Navy, has been expanding rapidly and is already the world's largest navy by total number of ships.